Hi, Dr. Lauren Kosinski here, founder of Metamorphosis Medicine, and I wanted to make a quick video about the idea that time is better than money for doctors, for us. Um, Several things prompted this, but I'm remembering that about 10 years ago, I was at a progressive healthcare think tank Twitter conference, which was an interesting idea in and of itself, because time was of the essence in trying to participate in that conversation. But the point of the meeting was to talk about how to incentivize physicians to adopt value-based medicine practices. But the only thing that the think tank participants could come up with, most of whom were not physicians, were financial incentives. And what was ironic to me about this was that this was the same group of people who would be perhaps most critical of physicians for being so oriented towards financial return for what we do and hold themselves out as being about something bigger, something better. All of my efforts to interject into that conversation that there are actually a lot of things that doctors want that aren't just financial, like time with patients, time to ourselves. But let's talk about time with patients for a minute, because part of the problem with having so little time with patients is having to change stories several times during the course of a day. And this can be difficult both for keeping track of the stories, but it also erodes something of the thing that called us here before we had the skill set that we're delivering, which was to make connection with other people, to be sure having a skill set, having something of value to offer to patients was a really big part of the goal. But all of that was in the service of making a connection, being valuable to other people. So I'm also thinking about an experience that I had in Alaska when I first moved there, and my husband wanted to take a month-long kayaking trip on Prince William Sound. So it turned out that most of the trips of that length were geared towards teenagers. Now, my husband was somebody who had been a nuclear engineer before he was a business consultant, and he kept a journal, a very short journal, but he noted every day something about what had happened during the day. And I knew that he was having a very different experience in Prince William Sound when we connected at some point, and he told me that he didn't have time or energy to write in his journal. And I had the thought that the trip leaders were doing this, exhausting these teenagers so that they wouldn't get into trouble with each other. I'm not sure how effective that was, but it really was a stretch to imagine a way that Pete could be so exhausted that he couldn't even write down what he did every day, probably for all of his adult life. More recently, after I wrote my last email newsletter, a good friend of mine who's a surgeon responded back and said, these are really big problems that I'm trying to address. And he just wishes that he had more time to think about things, time to problem solve. And we've made a really interesting situation for ourselves by not having space to be able to think about how to address some of the things that concern us most, that affect our quality of life. And finally, I was thinking about a good friend of mine who started surgery residency with me and was good. She was a better intern by far than I was. And she made a decision to go into radiology, which she has enjoyed and has been a fruitful career for her. But one of the things that she did when she was invited to stay on at faculty at the training program where she did her residency was negotiate at a time when nobody was doing this to have 2 weeks of free time out of every 12 weeks, not accumulated at the end of the year or paid back in some fashion, like with money. She wanted the time. And in fact, that standard that she set helped her, I think, to stay in the game for a really long time and to feel pretty good satisfaction with her work. And it also helped her when she left academics to choose the practice environment that she was in, partly based on the idea that it supported and endorsed this opportunity to take time. She's continued to be incredibly productive and really skilled at what she does, and in fact was the chief of medical staff at her hospital for a period of time. I mean, she's engaged, but she knew something about the formula that she needed. And I think we all need to discover what that formula is for us and then to make that happen. So I hope that this is thought-provoking and resonates with you in some fashion. Um, I'm putting this under the hashtag that came to mind last week of it doesn't have to be this way. And we're the architects of our experience. And I'm around to try to help figure that out and discover the ways that that can still be true, even in a setting where it seems like everything is working against that. So I look forward to hearing from you or to having a chance to talk in whatever way that that happens. Or maybe you just want to sit with this idea that time actually is better than money and see what happens.